Snowboarder found a frozen airship in the mountains, but what he saw inside the cabin shocked every. It was early in the morning when the sun barely kissed the snow-covered peaks of the mountain range. A quiet, serene chill hung in the air. The kind of cold that made you take a deep breath, feeling the crispness fill your lungs. It was exactly the kind of day insert name had been waiting for. He was a passionate snowboarder who had spent years exploring the snow-capped trails of the mountains. This trip wasn't just another adventure. It was his escape from the bustling city life, a place to clear his mind and embrace the thrill of the sport he loved. Today, he was far from the busy slopes where crowds of snowboards and skiers gathered. This part of the mountain was remote, untouched by human footprints. There were no lifts here, no tourist attractions, just endless powder snow and towering trees. The perfect spot for someone who valued peace and solitude. As he made his way down the narrow trail, the crisp sound of his snowboard carving through the snow echoed in the stillness. He loved the freedom this place offered. There were no rules here, no boundaries, just the mountain, the snow, and the feeling of weightlessness as he glided down the slopes. But as he continued down the mountain, something unusual caught his eye. For a moment, he thought he had imagined it. At first, it looked like just another rock or an outcrop of snow. However, as he zoomed closer, he saw it clearly, a large, metallic object, partially buried in the snow. He skidded to a stop, his heart racing with curiosity. It wasn't a rock, and it definitely wasn't something natural. The object was too symmetrical, too strange. It stood out against the white expanse of snow as though it didn't belong there. Insert name, hesitated. He had been snowboarding for years, but he had never come across anything like this. His mind raced with possibilities. Could it be an old vehicle, a piece of forgotten machinery, or perhaps it was a military relic? The idea of it being something from a past expedition crossed his mind, but none of that seemed to explain its odd shape. It looked like nothing he had ever seen before. He climbed off his board and slowly made his way over to it. As he got closer, the full scale of the object became apparent. It was huge, more like a ship than anything else, with a sleek, elongated body and a series of metal panels that seemed to shimmer under the layer of snow. The surface was weathered and scratched, as though it had been there for decades. Despite the wear and tear, it was strangely intact. His hands trembled slightly as he ran them along the cold metal. The surface was smooth and metallic, but underneath there was a strange texture, almost as if it had been frozen into the mountain itself. It wasn't like anything modern. It had a sense of age, as if it had been abandoned long ago. He took a deep breath, the cold air burning his lungs. His mind raced. What was this? How had it ended up here in the middle of nowhere, buried in snow and ice? And more importantly, who had built it? These were the questions that ran through his mind as he surveyed the structure. There was something eerie about it. It wasn't just the strange object itself, but the isolation of the place. The silence was almost overwhelming. The sound of his breath, the crunch of his boots on the snow, everything felt amplified. It was as if the world had stopped just for a moment, leaving only him and this mysterious ship-like object in the middle of the frozen wilderness. His curiosity began to get the better of him. He knew he had to see more. He had to find out what this thing was and what had happened to it. He looked around for any signs of an entrance. His eyes darted across the surface of the ship, hoping to find something, anything, that might indicate how to get inside. Then he spotted it. On the far side of the metallic object was a hatch barely visible beneath the layer of snow. It was small, round, and had a worn handle. His heart skipped a beat as he approached it. Could this be the key to unlocking the mystery? The hatch looked ancient, almost as if it hadn't been touched in years, maybe even decades. He tried pulling at the handle, but it didn't budge. The ice had sealed it shut. He tugged harder, frustrated by the resistance, but the frozen layer only made it more difficult. He stood there for a moment, thinking. If he didn't find a way inside, the mystery would remain unsolved. But there had to be a way. This airship, if that's what it was, wasn't meant to be left behind like this, hidden in the snow. His fingers ached with the cold as he searched for something to help him open the hatch. His eyes scanned the area, and he finally found a jagged rock nearby. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Using the rock, he pried the hatch open slowly, the sound of metal scraping against ice echoing in the cold air. With a final tug, the hatch gave way, revealing what lay inside. A blast of cold air rushed out, making him shiver, but he didn't hesitate. He stepped forward and peered inside. The dim light from the outside barely illuminated the interior, but it was enough to make out the details. The cabin inside was not as abandoned as he had expected. There were signs of life, remnants of something once functional, but time had taken its toll. Rusty wires dangled from the ceiling, and the walls were lined with strange equipment, some of which looked almost otherworldly. As he stepped inside, the smell of aged metal and stale air filled his nostrils. The floor was covered in a thin layer of frost, and he could see faint outlines of what looked like old furniture and supplies. It was as though this place had been frozen in time, left untouched for years, perhaps even decades. What struck him the most, however, was the sight of a strange figure in the corner of the room. It wasn't human, at least not in the way he was used to. The figure was humanoid in shape, but its features were bizarre and foreign, unlike anything he had ever seen. It looked like a statue, frozen in place, but there was something unsettling about the way it seemed to stare at him, its empty eyes watching his every movement. His heart raced. Who or what was this, and why was it here in the middle of the mountains, trapped inside a frozen airship? He stepped back, feeling a mix of awe and fear. This was no ordinary discovery. This was a mystery that went far beyond what he had ever imagined. He could feel the weight of the moment. He had found something extraordinary, something that had been hidden for so long, waiting for someone to uncover it. And now it seemed that someone was him. But as he looked around, he couldn't shake the feeling that this discovery was only the beginning. There were too many unanswered questions, too many things he didn't understand. And as the cold continued to bite at his skin, he realized one thing for sure. He had no idea what he was about to uncover. The airship, the frozen figure, the silence of the mountains, it all felt like a story waiting to be told, a story that had been locked away for far too long. As the cold wind swept through the mountains, insert name stood frozen in place, his eyes fixed on the strange figure in the corner of the airship's cabin. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The humanoid shape, frozen in what seemed like an eternal slumber, was a mystery in itself. The figure appeared to be dressed in old-fashioned military-style clothing, its form rigid and still as if time had forgotten it. There was a sense of something eerie, almost tragic about it. The frost that had built up around the figure was thick, as though the cold had preserved it perfectly, freezing it in time. Insert name stepped closer, the crunch of the frost beneath his boots loud in the otherwise silent cabin. He could see the fine details of the figure's features, but something about it made his skin crawl. The figure didn't look like a statue, it looked like a person, or at least had been a person once. Its face was covered in frost, but the eyes were wide open, frozen in a perpetual stare. It felt as though the figure was watching him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't as lifeless as it seemed. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of awe and unease. What was this place? Who was this person? And why were they left here, alone and forgotten, trapped inside a ship buried in the mountains? The cabin around him was dim, lit only by the faint light that crept in through the small hatch he had opened. The walls were lined with strange equipment and old, outdated technology. There were wires hanging from the ceiling, some of them frayed and twisted as though they had been damaged long ago. The air was thick with the scent of aged metal and stale, cold air. But despite the oddness of the scene, there was a strange sense of history to it. The airship, though clearly neglected, felt as though it had been abandoned not long ago. The frost had preserved it, like a time capsule left for someone to find. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. This was not just some abandoned wreck. It was something far more significant. But what was it? And why had it been left here, forgotten by the world? He felt like he had uncovered a part of history that had been buried for too long, and the more he looked around, the more questions filled his mind. There was a table in the center of the room, covered in papers and old maps. The edges of the paper were yellowed with age, but the ink on the maps was still clear, though faded. He walked over to the table and picked up a map, carefully unfolding it. The map seemed to depict the region, but the markings on it were unfamiliar. The lines and symbols seemed old, ancient even, and insert name wondered what they meant. Could this map have been made by the people who once operated this ship? Or was it something much older, a clue to the purpose of the airship itself? His fingers traced the lines of the map, but he didn't have time to fully investigate. His attention was drawn back to the figure in the corner. There was something unsettling about it, something he couldn't put his finger on. He took a step back, his eyes scanning the cabin for any other signs of what had happened here. Was this figure the only one left behind, or were there others? The silence of the cabin was oppressive. It felt like a tomb, and yet, insert name, couldn't shake the feeling that it was still alive with secrets. It wasn't just the figure that held his attention, but everything in this place. There were small details everywhere. The way the frost clung to the walls, the old machinery that still hummed faintly, and the strange sense of abandonment that hung in the air. He walked around the room, carefully inspecting the strange devices and equipment. Some of them were unrecognizable, while others seemed to be remnants of old technology. One device in particular caught his eye. It was a control panel, though it was completely covered in a thick layer of frost. He reached out and gently wiped away the ice, revealing a series of buttons and dials. The panel was old, but it seemed to still have power. He could feel a faint hum in the air, a sign that there was something still working beneath the surface. Insert name carefully examined the panel. The dials were worn and the buttons were rusty, but they still had the markings of their original design. What had this airship been used for? And who had built it? The questions kept piling up, but there was no easy answer. It was as if this airship had been left behind, abandoned in the mountains with no one left to tell its story. The more he looked, the more he realized that this wasn't just some old, forgotten wreck. It was a mystery, a puzzle waiting to be solved. The airship had a story to tell, but it was a story that had been lost to time. Now he had uncovered it, and he couldn't just walk away. He needed to know more. He needed to understand what had happened here. He turned his attention back to the figure in the corner. There was something about it that called to him. He couldn't explain it, but he felt like it was the key to unlocking the secrets of the airship. He stepped closer, his breath fogging up the cold air as he examined the figure more closely. It was dressed in a uniform of some kind, though it was hard to make out the details under the layers of frost and ice. The fabric was worn and tattered, but it looked like something that had been worn by soldiers or explorers from an earlier time. Insert name felt a sudden surge of curiosity. Who was this person? Why had they been left here, and what had happened to them? He couldn't help but feel a deep sense of sorrow for the person frozen in the corner. Whoever they had been trapped here, forgotten by the world. He glanced back at the door, his heart racing. Should he leave and go for help? But he knew the answer already. He had come this far. He wasn't going to leave until he had uncovered everything there was to know. This airship, with all its secrets, was something that could change everything. It was a part of history that had been buried for too long, and insert name was determined to bring it into the light. But before he could make a decision, something caught his eye. A faint light flickered in the corner of the cabin, casting strange shadows on the walls. For a moment he thought it was just a trick of the light, but then the light flickered again. It was coming from a small panel on the wall. Insert name rushed over to it, his heart pounding in his chest. As he approached the panel, the light flickered once more, and then the panel opened with a soft hiss. Inside, there was a small compartment, and in that compartment, something gleamed, a small metallic object that seemed to glow with an unnatural light. He reached out and grabbed it, feeling the weight of it in his hand. It was a key, a small, old-fashioned key, but it was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The key felt cold to the touch, and as he held it in his hand, a sense of foreboding washed over him. What was this key for? And why was it hidden away in this compartment, alongside the figure and the strange machinery? The questions were starting to pile up, and yet insert name felt like he was just scratching the surface. The airship's story was far from over. It was waiting to be uncovered, and insert name was determined to find out what had happened here. As he stood there, holding the mysterious key in his hand, he realized one thing: he couldn't leave now, not without knowing the truth. Not without uncovering the rest of the story. Insert name stood there for a moment, holding the small, metallic key in his hand. Its cool surface seemed to hum with an energy he couldn't quite explain. It was an odd feeling, like the key was meant for something important, something that he had yet to uncover. He turned it over in his fingers, studying its shape. It wasn't like any key he had seen before. It was old, worn, but the metal had an unusual shine to it, as if it had been carefully crafted and designed to last. He placed the key back into his jacket pocket, his mind racing with questions. What had he just found? And what was this key meant to unlock? There was something about this airship, this mysterious place, that was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Everything about it, The figure in the corner, the strange equipment, the old map, felt like a forgotten piece of history, waiting to be pieced back together. Insert Name looked around the cabin once more, taking in every detail. The walls were lined with strange equipment that he couldn't identify, some of it rusted and old, while others still seemed to hold some strange energy, as if they had been built for something far beyond what the world had seen at the time. He ran his fingers over the buttons and dials, feeling the cold of the metal. The cabin was eerie in its silence. It was as though everything inside it had been frozen in time, abandoned and left behind. The frost-covered walls and windows blocked out much of the sunlight, but the faint glow of light that slipped through the small openings created an otherworldly glow inside the cabin. Insert Name couldn't shake the feeling that he was not just in some forgotten relic, but in a place that had been purposely hidden away. It was hard to ignore the figure that still stood motionless in the corner. The frozen figure, dressed in military-like clothes, stared back at him with wide eyes frozen in time. The more he looked at it, the more questions swirled in his mind. Who was this person? What was their connection to the airship? And why had they been left here alone and forgotten? He turned away from the figure, trying to focus on other parts of the cabin. His eyes wandered over the map on the table, still partially open. The markings on the map seemed to tell a story that was lost in time. Could this map be the key to understanding everything? He moved towards the table, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. Carefully, he unfolded the rest of the map, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to decipher the markings. As he studied the map, he realized that it didn't seem to correspond with any modern map he had seen. The terrain was different, and the names of places were unfamiliar to him. The map seemed ancient, and the ink, although faded, was still legible. There were markings indicating certain areas. Some of them looked like abandoned settlements. Others appeared to be routes through treacherous mountain passes. But the most striking part of the map was a location marked with a large X, surrounded by strange symbols. He stared at the symbol for a long moment. It looked like a place of significance, a place that had been important, but why? Why was this place marked on the map, and what had happened to the people who had once used it? The more he looked, the more he realized that this map was a vital clue. It was a piece of the puzzle, a link to the past that had been hidden away in this airship. But what exactly was this place? And why had it been forgotten for so long? His mind raced with possibilities. The map, the key, the figure in the corner, it was all connected, but in ways he couldn't yet understand. Insert Name glanced around the room again, trying to find any other clues that could help him solve the mystery. There had to be more here, more information, more pieces of the puzzle, something that would shed light on what had happened to the people who had once inhabited this airship. But the cabin seemed to hold its secrets tightly. Every corner was filled with odd equipment, old documents, and strange symbols, but nothing that immediately explained the purpose of the airship or its crew. The key in his pocket seemed to weigh heavier now, as if it had a greater significance than he had first realized. What if the key unlocked something more than just a door or a compartment? What if it was the key to understanding everything? He knew he couldn't leave this place without finding out. The answers were here, hidden in plain sight, and he had to uncover them. He turned back to the control panel he had discovered earlier. The faint hum still vibrated through the air, almost like a heartbeat. The machinery wasn't completely dead. It still had power, and that meant it could still function. He approached the panel again, studying the buttons and dials more closely this time. Some of the buttons had markings on them, but they were worn and faded, making it impossible to know what they controlled. Insert Name felt a surge of frustration. He needed to get to the bottom of this. He had come this far, and he wasn't about to walk away now without knowing what had happened here. He ran his hand over the control panel, carefully pressing a few of the buttons in a random sequence. The lights flickered for a moment, but nothing else happened. He tried again, this time pressing the buttons more deliberately, but still nothing changed. His heart sank. Maybe the machinery was too old to work, or maybe he was doing something wrong. But then, just as he was about to give up, something happened. The faint hum grew louder, and for a brief moment the lights above him flickered to life. The panel let out a soft beep, and a low mechanical sound echoed through the cabin. The control panel had come to life. His breath caught in his throat. Something was happening. The machinery was working. It wasn't much, but it was a sign there was still life in this ship, still something worth discovering. He pressed a few more buttons and this time the panel responded. A small screen on the panel flickered to life, displaying a series of numbers and symbols. Insert Name leaned in, trying to make sense of what was on the screen. The symbols were strange, unfamiliar, and the numbers seemed to be part of some sort of code. It was clear now that this airship was far more advanced than anything he had seen before. The technology was ancient, but it was still functioning. He could sense that he was on the verge of uncovering something huge, something that could change everything. The key in his pocket seemed to call to him, and for the first time he wondered if the key might unlock the control panel. He pulled it out and held it up to the screen, studying the intricate details of the metal. The key had a unique design, with small grooves and markings that matched some of the symbols on the screen. Could it be? Was this the key to activating the rest of the machinery? His hands shook as he inserted the key into a small slot on the panel. There was a brief moment of silence, and then the entire control panel lit up with a bright blue light. The numbers and symbols on the screen shifted, and a new message appeared, this one in a language he couldn't read. But before he could react, a loud mechanical sound echoed through the cabin, followed by a low rumbling. The airship shook slightly, and for the first time since entering Insert Name, felt a sense of unease. What had he just unlocked? What had he activated? The airship seemed to be coming to life. It was as if the ship had been waiting for someone to unlock its secrets, and now that it had, there was no turning back. Whatever had been hidden in this place, whatever had happened here, was about to be revealed. As the airship came to life, Insert Name felt a rush of adrenaline flood his veins. The low rumbling that echoed through the cabin was like the awakening of some ancient beast, its gears and systems slowly grinding back into action after years of silence. The faint hum from the control panel grew louder, the lights flickering more brightly as if the airship was stretching, shaking off years of frost and neglect. Insert Name stepped back, his mind racing with excitement and uncertainty. The panels on the walls now glowed with a faint blue light, and the machinery that had once seemed like ancient relics was now alive with activity. Buttons and dials clicked and whirred, their purpose still a mystery to him, but it was clear. The ship was waking up, responding to the key he had inserted into the control panel. He felt an overwhelming sense of urgency. He had unlocked something that had been hidden for so long, and now the airship was revealing its secrets. But there was more to uncover. He could feel it in the air. There were questions that still needed answers, and he wasn't about to walk away now. He looked back at the screen on the control panel, where the strange symbols and numbers continued to shift and change. The message that had appeared earlier was still there, but now it seemed more urgent. The language was foreign, indecipherable to him, but somehow it felt like it was meant for someone to understand. He had to figure out what it meant, and fast. He glanced around the cabin, his eyes darting from one piece of equipment to another. The machinery was ancient but still functional. He had no idea what any of it did, but he could feel the pulse of energy coursing through the air. It was as if the airship had a life of its own, its systems working together in harmony. The more he observed, the more he realized that the ship was much more than just a machine. It was a vessel of history, a time capsule that had been hidden for reasons he couldn't yet understand. The figure in the corner, still frozen in time, seemed to watch him as he moved around the cabin. There was something about it, something unsettling in its frozen gaze. Insert Name couldn't shake the feeling that the figure was part of the ship's story. It wasn't just a forgotten relic, it was a clue, a key to understanding everything. But what did it mean? Why had this person been left behind? As the airship continued to hum and buzz, Insert Name tried to make sense of the control panel. The symbols on the screen seemed to be part of some sort of code, but without knowing the language, he couldn't decipher it. He couldn't waste time. He had to figure out what was going on. He turned his attention to the rest of the cabin, searching for anything that might help him understand what had happened here. His eyes fell on the map again, the one he had uncovered earlier. It lay on the table, its edges frayed and yellowed with age. The markings on the map seemed to point to a specific location, an X that was surrounded by strange symbols. He felt drawn to it, as if the map was trying to tell him something. The more he looked at it, the more he realized that this was no ordinary map. It was a guide, a map to something important, something hidden away. He moved closer to the table, carefully studying the map again. The terrain it depicted was unfamiliar. and the names of the places seemed to belong to a time long past. The map seemed to chart a course through treacherous mountain passes, leading to a place marked with the X, what was at that location. Was it the key to understanding the airship's purpose? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the map was the missing piece of the puzzle. It held the answers, but he needed to know more. He reached for the small, metallic key he had found earlier, still tucked safely in his jacket pocket. It seemed to weigh heavily in his hand, as though it were calling him to use it. He turned it over in his fingers, studying the grooves and markings on the metal. The key had an intricate design, one that seemed to match some of the symbols on the control panel. Could it unlock more than just the panel? Was it meant to open something deeper within the airship, something more significant? Determined, insert name, walked over to the control panel once again. The hum of the machinery seemed to grow louder as he approached. He had to try again, try to unlock whatever was hidden inside this ship. He inserted the key into a small slot at the base of the control panel, feeling a surge of anticipation. The key clicked into place, and for a brief moment, the entire airship seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a low, mechanical whir, the ship responded. The screen on the control panel flashed, and the strange symbols began to move faster, shifting like a puzzle coming together. The sound of machinery filled the cabin, and for a moment, everything seemed to come alive. It was as if the airship was finally revealing its true purpose. But as the lights flickered, insert name heard something else, a soft, distant sound like the creak of metal. It wasn't coming from the control panel, but from somewhere deeper within the ship. He paused, his heart racing. What was that noise? It sounded like something was moving, something hidden away. He turned away from the control panel and moved toward the source of the sound. The airship seemed to shift slightly beneath his feet, as though it were settling into place. The rumbling noise grew louder, and insert name realized that the ship was not just waking up, it was moving. For a moment, he froze in place, unsure of what to do. The airship was old, ancient even, and yet it was coming to life as if it had been waiting for someone to activate it. But why? What was the purpose of this ship? And where was it going? The rumbling grew louder, and the ship seemed to shake slightly. He could feel the vibrations in the walls and the floor beneath his feet. It was as if the ship was preparing to move, to take off after all these years of dormancy. But how? And where was it heading? Insert name knew he had to act quickly. He couldn't let this opportunity slip away. The ship was about to reveal its secrets, but he had to be ready. He rushed back to the control panel, his mind racing. The screen was still flashing with strange symbols, but they were changing now. The numbers and letters seemed to form a sequence, like a code that was being unlocked. As he watched the screen, he realized something. There was a pattern to the symbols. It wasn't random. The symbols were forming a map that seemed to show the path the airship would take. The X from the old map was on it, and now he understood. It wasn't just a destination. It was the point where the ship was headed. He had unlocked the map, but now he had to figure out what was waiting for him at the end of the journey. What had this airship been carrying all these years? And what would he find when he arrived at the destination marked on the map? He didn't know, but he couldn't turn back now. The ship was moving, and he was on board. Whatever was waiting for him, whatever secrets the airship held, he was going to uncover them. The journey had only just begun. The airship continued to hum, its mechanical sounds growing more rhythmic as if the ship itself was coming to life. Insert name felt a mixture of awe and trepidation. The mysteries hidden inside the airship were now slowly beginning to unfold. It was as though he had unlocked a door into a world that had been lost for years, and there was no going back now. The vibrations beneath his feet were becoming stronger, and the once still walls of the cabin now seemed to pulse with life. The ship was moving, and from the sounds around him it was clear that it was preparing for something, a journey perhaps, but where was it headed? And what had caused it to lie dormant for so long? Insert name stepped back from the control panel, his mind racing with questions. The screen that had once been filled with strange symbols and codes had now stabilized, showing a map. The markings on the map were clearer now, showing a route that led to a place far beyond the mountains where he had found the airship. He couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose in the ship's movements. It was heading somewhere important. He turned his attention back to the cabin, the air growing colder as the ship continued to power up. The faint blue light that had illuminated the control panel now filled the cabin, casting long shadows on the walls. There were still pieces of the puzzle that hadn't been revealed, but the ship was showing signs of activity, as if it was ready to take him on a journey through time and history. The sound of machinery came from somewhere deeper within the ship, and insert name decided to investigate. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something crucial hidden in the heart of the airship. He walked through the cabin, his footsteps echoing in the now quiet space. The walls, once covered in frost, had begun to thaw as the airship powered up, revealing intricate carvings and symbols he had missed earlier. He ran his hand along the walls, tracing the patterns carved into the metal. It was clear now that this wasn't just a simple airship. It was a vessel of knowledge, a machine designed for something much more than just transport. These carvings, though worn by time, seemed to tell a story that had been lost to history. As he moved deeper into the ship, he found a doorway. The door was slightly ajar, and a dim light shone through the crack. He hesitated for a moment, his heart racing, but curiosity got the better of him. He pushed the door open, revealing a small room much different from the rest of the ship. The room was filled with strange equipment and rows of cabinets, each one covered in dust and cobwebs. It looked like a storage area, but something about it felt different. The air was thick with the scent of old books and metal, and the walls were lined with shelves that held ancient documents and artifacts. As he stepped further into the room, his eyes fell on a large metal chest that stood in the center of the room. The chest was adorned with strange symbols, matching the markings he had seen on the walls of the airship. There was no lock, no keyhole, but the chest seemed to have a presence of its own, as if it was waiting for someone to open it. Insert name approached the chest slowly, feeling a sense of anticipation building inside him. The chest felt important, as though it held the final piece of the mystery he had been unraveling. He hesitated for a moment before reaching out to touch the surface. As soon as his fingers made contact, there was a faint click, and the chest opened, revealing a set of rolled-up parchments inside. He carefully pulled one of the parchments out and unfurled it. The writing on the paper was old, its edges frayed with age, but the ink was still legible. It was in the same strange language he had seen earlier on the screen, but this time it was more detailed. The words were written in a flowing script, each symbol intricately designed. It was a language he had never seen before, but there was something familiar about it. As he studied the parchment, the pieces of the puzzle began to come together. The airship, the strange symbols, the frozen figure, it all had a purpose. The ship wasn't just a vessel. It was a key, a bridge between worlds, between times. It had been built to carry knowledge, to protect something precious, something that had been lost to history. The more he read, the more he realized that the airship wasn't just an ancient machine. It was a map, a guide to something even greater. The route on the map he had seen earlier was not just a path. It was a journey to a place that held the answers to all the questions that had been plaguing him. This ship was not meant to stay buried in the mountains forever. It was meant to lead someone to the truth. As the realization hit him, insert name felt a surge of excitement. He wasn't just an explorer anymore. He was a part of something much bigger, something that had been hidden for centuries. He was on the verge of discovering a truth that had been locked away in time, waiting for someone like him to find it. But the journey was far from over. The airship was still moving, and insert name knew that it was heading towards the destination marked on the map. He had no idea what awaited him there, but he felt a deep sense of responsibility. The knowledge contained in this ship, the secrets it held, had to be uncovered. It was his mission now, and he couldn't turn back. He rolled up the parchment carefully and placed it back into the chest. He took a deep breath and turned to leave the room. As he walked back toward the control panel, he felt the weight of the airship's history pressing down on him. There were still so many unanswered questions, so many mysteries to unravel, but he was ready. He had come this far, and he wasn't going to stop now. The hum of the machinery was louder now, the ship's systems fully powered up. The map on the screen flickered again, showing the route clearly. The destination was close, and insert name could feel it in his bones. The airship was guiding him, taking him to the place where the secrets of the past would finally be revealed. He stood at the control panel, staring at the map one last time. He knew that what he was about to uncover would change everything. The world had no idea what lay hidden in the mountains, but he was about to find out. The airship was more than just a relic of the past. It was a beacon, calling him to something greater. As the ship continued its journey, insert name felt a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. The mystery was finally within reach, and there was no turning back. Whatever lay ahead, he was ready to face it. The airship had come to life, and so had he. The journey was just beginning, and the truth was waiting to be discovered.